It was a tranquil evening in the Missouri countryside when Glenn McParron drove down a familiar gravel road, taking a shortcut to his mother's house. Suddenly, something unusual caught his attention. Two cars parked on the roadside. Moments later, he noticed something lying in the middle of the road. He stopped the car and stepped out to investigate, only to have his heart sink. This was no ordinary accident. Something horrific had just occurred, and soon the truth would emerge, a tale of deception, a hidden life, and a wedding that would never happen. Molly Jean Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Raised by her loving parents, Timothy and Sandy, alongside her brother Tim, Molly's childhood was filled with warmth, creativity, and a unique spark that distinguished her from others. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, she refused to let it define her. Instead, she embraced her individuality and moved forward with determination. Those who knew Molly remember her as vibrant, imaginative, and deeply passionate. She earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated herself to education. Her life was a colorful tapestry woven with Harry Potter novels, comic books, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay outfits. She even launched her own nail polish line, showcasing her creative spirit. Home was her sanctuary, filled with books, fantasy worlds, and the comfort of her 5 cats. Molly's personality was a blend of strength and gentleness, calm yet fiercely authentic. In her mid-20s, she married, but the union fell apart within 2 years, ending in divorce. During that tumultuous time, she discovered she was pregnant. Before her son was born, she entered a surprising new chapter, a relationship with a childhood acquaintance, Amber Brady. Though they hadn't been friends growing up, their reconnection years later felt serendipitous. Amber had also recently exited a marriage, and their relationship blossomed into something unexpected, yet deeply fulfilling. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who had cerebral palsy, Amber stood by her side, and together they faced challenges hand in hand. After maternity leave, Molly took a job at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addie. 16 years her senior, James was a Navy veteran and corrections officer, married with children. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. He claimed his marriage to Melanie was ending, and she believed him. As time passed, their friendship evolved into an affair, conducted in secrecy. Molly kept it from Amber, and James concealed it from his wife. But secrets have a way of unraveling. One day, Amber spotted Molly with an older man at a gas station. Her suspicions solidified, and she tracked Molly to a motel where she confronted her. The relationship ended abruptly. Now, free from her past, Molly began dating James openly. She fell hard, but friends grew wary. They noticed she paid for everything, and James avoided eye contact, exuding a strange, cold presence. Yet Molly was convinced he was the one. In October 2017, James told her his divorce had been finalized. At 34, Molly was ecstatic and proposed to him herself. James accepted, and with joy, Molly dove into wedding planning, envisioning a celebration infused with Disney magic inspired by Beauty and the Beast, featuring burgundy and gold colors. She hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even chose 2 dresses because she couldn't decide on just one. Molly documented her preparations on a new YouTube channel, where viewers could see the sparkle in her eyes and the excitement in her voice. She shared stories, daily vlogs, and occasionally sang in her soft, princess-like voice. For her, this wedding was a fairy tale come true. However, as the date approached, reality took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, tragedy struck James's family when his ex-wife, Melanie, was involved in a devastating car accident and placed on life support. James had to care for their children, and Molly stood by him. They considered postponing the wedding, but ultimately decided against it. In April 2018, just days before their ceremony, Melanie passed away. Despite the sorrow, Molly pressed on, finalizing the last details while James focused on funeral arrangements. The situation was complex and tragic, but Molly remained determined to make her wedding day the happiest of her life. Amidst this turmoil, another detail raised eyebrows. Melanie was not James's first wife, nor his second. Before meeting Molly, James had already been married 4 times. So when the couple appeared at the courthouse to apply for a marriage license, the atmosphere grew tense. James was visibly anxious, vague in his responses, and reluctant to discuss his marital history. Molly seemed either unaware or unconcerned by the red flags. She was in love, and nothing else mattered. But Molly would never reach the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the planned wedding, her body was discovered on a desolate gravel road in Monroe County. What initially appeared to be an accident was quickly ruled a homicide. Investigators found no signs of a struggle, and her belongings were untouched. Inside her vehicle, police located wedding documents, plans, checklists, and appointment notes, all linked to James Addie. The clues led them directly to his doorstep. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on the door of the man set to become Molly's husband. Instead of a grieving fiancé, they were met by a woman, his wife, Melanie Addie. The same Melanie who was supposedly dead. Investigators were stunned. The woman who answered the door was meant to have died in a hospital just days earlier. That story, it turned out, was entirely fabricated. Melanie was alive and married to the man who was to marry someone else in just 48 hours. Both James and Melanie were brought in for questioning. Initially, detectives had no idea they were speaking to a woman who, according to her husband's lie, should have been dead. They were simply trying to understand how the groom of a murdered bride was still married to another woman. Melanie, for her part, knew who Molly was by name, believing her to be one of James's co-workers. When she learned the questioning was about Molly's death, she assumed the police were merely interviewing acquaintances. The truth hit her like a thunderbolt. She had no idea her husband had been unfaithful for years, let alone engaged to another woman. James had kept his double life so well hidden that even Melanie, who shared a home with him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators he came home every night like clockwork, never indicating he was unhappy or leading another life. Only in hindsight did certain things begin to make sense, like how James often returned home late from work, always about 2 hours late. At the time, she attributed it to extra shifts or traffic. He never explained the delays, and she never asked. Now the lies were unraveling. Police discovered that for years, James had led 2 lives. To Molly, he claimed his divorce was in process, but in reality, he had never filed the paperwork. When pressed, he invented a tragic tale about his wife being in a terrible accident, lingering in a coma, and eventually passing away. The story, while dramatic, was believable to Molly, who had no reason to doubt the man she loved. With his imaginary past cleared, James accepted her marriage proposal and began planning for a future he knew could never exist. Now that the deception was exposed, police were no longer viewing James as a person of interest. They were considering him a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was killed. James had told her he was going to meet a friend around 7:30 p.m., but he returned home an hour later, claiming the friend never showed. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his statement, recalling that James arrived home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he claimed. Worse, their daughter remembered that when her father came home, he went straight to the shower and immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, that detail was significant, suggesting James may have been trying to remove evidence, blood, dirt, or gun residue, from his clothes. His alibi was crumbling. James was arrested and scheduled for formal questioning the following day. Melanie, having just uncovered her husband's infidelity and deception, was released after her statement. She returned home to face the heartbreaking task of pretending everything was normal for her daughter, who was preparing for an upcoming school dance. Meanwhile, she began searching for answers, starting with her own attic. There, tucked away in a trunk, Melanie found the truth she had never suspected. Photos, souvenirs, letters, evidence of a secret life that had spanned 7 years. Molly and James had traveled together too, Florida and Mexico, vacations he had explained away as work trips or time with friends. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. In front of her daughter, Melanie maintained her composure, but in private, she was piecing together a devastating puzzle, one that ended not just in betrayal, but in murder. James Addie had maintained 2 lives for nearly a decade, 2 relationships, 2 homes, and nearly 2 marriages. Now, one woman was dead, and the truth could no longer be hidden. His teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn the truth from her father or even from her mother. She found out from friends at school who had come across a news article online. Suddenly, her private world was shattered in public view. It would be an unimaginable burden for any young person, but for a teenager still attending classes daily, the humiliation and judgment were unbearable. Whispers followed her in the hallways, and as the case made headlines, Emma began uncovering even more devastating truths about her father's double life and the woman he was preparing to marry. As she combed through articles and reports, Emma recognized a face. She had met Molly Watson once before. Years earlier, when preparing for a cosplay event, her father had taken her to Molly's home so that his friend could help sew her costume. At the time, Emma had no idea Molly was his mistress. Now, with hindsight, everything felt painfully clear. As Emma and her mother tried to process what had happened, investigators intensified their efforts to tie James Addie directly to the murder. At the scene where Molly's body was discovered, detectives found tire tracks imprinted in the gravel that matched James's car. When they searched his vehicle, they noted it was caked in mud, consistent with the rural back road where Molly had been killed. The evidence didn't stop there. Near Molly's body, investigators recovered a white T-shirt with a custom graphic, personally designed by Emma, an innocent gift from daughter to father. The shirt bore traces of gunpowder and, more damningly, Molly's DNA. James had left it behind. Although the bullet that ended Molly's life was too damaged to match to a specific weapon, circumstantial evidence was stacking up. Phone records showed that James had called Molly on the night of her murder, with a 20-minute conversation traced to the area where her body was later found. Then there was the testimony from Glenn McParren, the man who had stumbled upon Molly's body. He recalled encountering a man on the roadside that evening, short, white, and appearing to be around 50, who had briefly stopped to ask if help was needed. That man, according to prosecutors, was James Addie. The motive, they argued, was fear. Molly had begun to suspect something was wrong. Her online activity revealed a trail. She had searched for obituaries and hospital records for James's wife, Melanie. But no matter how hard she looked, she found nothing because Melanie was still alive. Prosecutors believed that discovery sealed her fate. Faced with the possibility of exposure, his lies, his secret marriage, and a lifetime of deception unraveling, James chose silence over confession. He didn't end the affair or come clean. Instead, he allegedly plotted to eliminate the one person who knew too much. What made the crime so disturbing wasn't just the act itself, but the recklessness and arrogance behind it. James left a personalized shirt at the crime scene, his name on documents inside Molly's car, acting as though none of it could ever be traced back to him. But the trail was too wide, too sloppy, and far too revealing. The trial began on April the 26th, 2021. Prosecutors brought in tire tread experts, forensic analysts, and witnesses to paint the full picture. Melanie testified again, stating clearly that she had never known about her husband's affair and that, in her view, James was absolutely capable of murder. She described him as possessive, manipulative, and unwilling to relinquish control. When James's daughter took the stand, her account added chilling new details. She remembered her father returning home late, well after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death, going straight to the shower and starting a load of laundry shortly after. The smell of bleach filled the house. She recounted how he seemed nervous, on edge, and unlike himself, lingering near her quietly before walking away. Melanie confirmed that at the time of Molly's murder, she was still married to James, still living in the same house, and still believing her life was normal. She had never known that her husband was using another phone to communicate with a second life, a second love. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie Addie was still reeling from the avalanche of truth that had collapsed over her life. She had learned that her husband of more than 2 decades had been preparing to marry another woman, that he had signed a marriage license fraudulently claiming to be divorced, and that the fantasy life he had constructed with Molly Watson had been sustained through lies and ultimately violence. She had no idea he was having an affair, no idea he had claimed she was dead, and no idea her own name had been used to fabricate a tragedy that never occurred. That night, James had left the house wearing blue jeans, a black jacket, and his boots. After the police had come and gone, Melanie began searching their home the next day. Something felt off. She noticed that the jacket James wore was missing and asked about it, but it was never found. Her search led her to the garage where James had parked a maroon car, strangely inside rather than outside, where he usually left it. In the loft area above, Melanie discovered a locked chest. Inside was a photo album and boxes containing personal items that belonged to Molly Watson. The reality was undeniable. James had taken at least 2 trips with Molly, vacations he had explained away as work-related or trips with friends. Melanie had never suspected the truth. Ironically, when she once asked to travel alone, James had resisted, claiming it would be an opportunity for her to be unfaithful. Yet he had been the one cultivating a hidden relationship. During the trial, James Addie refused to testify in his own defense. Instead, he submitted a written statement, essentially a love letter, to Molly Watson, the very woman he stood accused of murdering. It was a chilling final gesture that seemed to reflect either deep delusion or staggering arrogance. He later filed for a new trial, arguing that his attorney had failed to represent him adequately, and claiming that not all evidence had been presented in his favor. The jury saw through the facade. In July 2021, James Addie was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action, receiving a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the very end, he maintained his innocence, vowing to appeal. But prison walls don't lie. According to reports, James later confided in a fellow inmate, stating bluntly that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreversible. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly Watson's loved ones buried her. The day that should have marked the beginning of her new life became the date engraved on her headstone. The pain didn't stop there. In the months that followed, tragedy struck again. Both of Molly's parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, passed away. The heartbreak of losing their daughter had proven too much. Sandy developed severe psychological trauma following Molly's murder, and her condition quickly deteriorated. Timothy, who had lovingly cared for his wife through the ordeal, died of a heart attack in September 2020. Years of stress, grief, and unrelenting sorrow had broken him. Neither parent lived to see justice served in the courtroom. They never heard the guilty verdict read aloud, nor did they witness the man responsible for their daughter's death led away in handcuffs. Molly's son, Jack, was left without a mother. After her death, his care became a priority. Fortunately, he was placed with family members and is being raised in a nurturing, supportive environment, a small light in an otherwise dark and devastating legacy. Her brother Tim now speaks for the family that remains. In court, he addressed the jury, not only with sorrow, but with urgency. He spoke of the irreparable toll Molly's murder had taken, not just the loss of his sister, but of his parents as well. He described his mother's descent into mental illness, his father's death from grief, and the silence left in the absence of three people who had once filled his life with joy. He pleaded for justice. Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She was bright, passionate, and full of life. All of it was taken in a single selfish act. Her brother put it best. He chose to take her life without mercy, and he asked the jury to show no mercy to him. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.